Judge laughs at black woman in court, then freezes when she flashes her USSS badge. Rosalind Dupree never expected her day in court to spiral into a monumental clash of pride, prejudice, and hidden power. As she crossed the threshold of the Hamilton County Courthouse, many assumed she was just another face in the crowd, waiting anxiously for her turn before the bench. But beneath her calm demeanor, she carried a history and a secret that would soon leave everyone stunned. The judge, known for his sharp tongue and iron-fisted rulings, made the grave mistake of underestimating her. Little did he know, this soft-spoken black woman had the ultimate ace up her sleeve, a United States Secret Service badge. The Hamilton County Courthouse stood as a mammoth structure of neoclassical columns and arched windows, a testament to an era when justice was envisioned as austere and unyielding. Its marble floors bore the echoes of countless footsteps, each belonging to people lawyers, plaintiffs, defendants, bringing their hopes and tragedies to the halls of law. On that crisp October morning, a slight chill clung to the air outside, while inside, tensions ran a bit warmer. Rosalind Dupree had arrived early. She had walked through the bustling corridors, noticing the typical courthouse swirl of activity, attorneys balancing stacks of files, anxious litigants fidgeting in wooden benches, and bailiffs scanning the halls with watchful eyes. On any other day, she might have blended seamlessly into the background, but there was a weight to her posture that morning, as though she carried something intangible, an invisible shield, as well as a sharpened awareness. Dressed in a navy blue pantsuit, Rosalind wore minimal jewelry, a single watch, a small pair of stud earrings, and the slight glint of a necklace that disappeared beneath the collar of her blouse. Her dark hair was swept back in a neat twist. At 5'7", she had a presence that was calm, yet quietly commanding. Still, in the eyes of many who didn't look closely enough, she was just a relatively young black woman attending a hearing, perhaps for a traffic violation or a small claims dispute. In the courtroom 3 hallway, she took a seat on one of the worn wooden benches that lined the wall. She glanced briefly at a mother holding her son's hand, a child no older than 7, wearing a frightened look. There was an older gentleman with a cane and a stack of documents that threatened to spill onto the floor. The collective unease and impatience weighed on everyone. Rosalind's mind drifted for a moment, recalling that she had spent countless hours in venues similar to this one. The difference was, she was usually backstage, so to speak, in a professional capacity. She was intimately familiar with the labyrinthine corridors of federal buildings, from the Department of the Treasury in Washington, D.C., to smaller, tucked-away courtrooms across the nation. But she had rarely arrived in a purely personal capacity. That in itself was a novelty. An intern, brandishing a manila folder, emerged from the double doors leading to courtroom 3. "Dupree versus Rowland, you can come in now," he said, his voice quivering with the uncertain authority of a legal newcomer. Rosalind stood, smoothing a slight wrinkle from her pant leg. She had no entourage, no attorney by her side. She wanted to be seen as an ordinary citizen, taking her rightful place in a judicial setting, at least at first. The way the intern's eyes skimmed over her spoke volumes. He seemed mildly surprised that she was all alone, and she wondered how many others in these hallways assumed she couldn't afford representation. As she walked in, the hush of the courtroom enveloped her. At the center was a raised bench of polished mahogany. To the left, a short counsel table. To the right, another. A few rows of pew-like benches stood behind, sparsely occupied by other curious onlookers, and a couple of lawyers awaiting their turn. The overhead lights, a series of fluorescent fixtures, hummed softly, and the American flag in one corner fluttered slightly under the ventilation system's breeze. She approached her designated seat. Across the aisle, on the opposite side of the courtroom, sat a man in a sharp suit, Kenneth Rowland, older, with grey at his temples and a practiced arrogance that clung to him like a cologne. He barely glanced at Rosalind, turning his attention instead to the judge's bench. Judge Gregory Lawson was not yet in the room, but everyone knew of him. Rumors and anecdotes about his temperament circulated regularly among the courthouse staff and the local legal community. Some called him brilliant yet mercurial, others called him unfair, even condescending. The one thread consistent in all accounts was his unwavering devotion to what he perceived as the rule of law, which, in practice, often meant little mercy for those on the receiving end of his gavel, especially if he disapproved of them for personal reasons. In the hush of that waiting moment, Rosalind felt a slight tremor in her stomach. She knew the stakes were high, not just for her personally, but for everyone who had ever been ridiculed or dismissed in a courtroom because they did not fit the mold of what a respected litigant looked like. In her line of work, she had seen the best and worst of people under pressure. This time, however, she was the one in the hot seat, about to test her own composure and cunning in a place where all eyes, especially the judges, would scrutinize her. Somewhere beyond those double doors, Judge Lawson was likely adjusting his robes, maybe leafing through a docket sheet with her name on it. She braced herself, took a breath, and reminded herself of the lines she did not want to cross unless forced. Little did she know that the moment that might force her hand would arrive sooner than expected, and it would involve not just a test of her patience, but a revelation that would rock the courtroom to its core. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, voice echoing. Everyone stood in unison as Judge Gregory Lawson emerged, a tall, thin man with perpetually furrowed brows. He ascended the bench with practiced pomp, scanning the room as though memorizing each face. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the bailiff's introduction, and then motioned for everyone to be seated. Rosalind, her posture straight, waited patiently as the judge shuffled some papers and adjusted the microphone before him. Case number 14, CV09, Dupree versus Rowland. Will the parties please identify themselves for the record? Lawson's voice was clipped, almost mechanical. Kenneth Rowland stood first. Kenneth Rowland, Your Honor, representing Rowland Enterprises. He was accompanied by a lawyer who nodded but did not introduce himself, yet likely an associate or co-counsel. Then Lawson shifted his gaze to Rosalind. "And you are Miss Dupree?" he asked, scanning her with a cool detachment. "Yes, Your Honor." "Rosalind Dupree, do you have counsel?" "No, Your Honor, I'll be representing myself pro se." Lawson didn't hide his disapproval. He let out a soft snort, which might have been stifled laughter or simple exasperation at the idea. "A bold move, Miss Dupree," he said, eyes narrowing. "Let's see how that plays out." Rosalind felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise slightly. She was no stranger to strong personalities, but something about Lawson's tone made her insides coil. She remembered reading up on him in local news archives and hearing second-hand stories from acquaintances in the legal field. Now, seeing him in person, she sensed an almost performative quality to his dismissiveness, like he was putting on a show, especially for someone he believed beneath the level of seasoned attorneys. "State the nature of your claim," he continued, scribbling notes on the docket sheet. Rosalind cleared her throat. "Your Honor, Mr. Rowland breached a service contract we had. Specifically, he agreed to." "That's enough." Lawson cut her off. "I have the complaint in front of me. Let's not spend the entire morning reciting it." He turned his attention to Kenneth Rowland's attorney. "How do you respond to these allegations?" The lawyer stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, Mr. Rowland categorically denies any breach. The contract in question was vague, incomplete, and Miss Dupree failed to meet her own obligations, rendering any potential claim against my client invalid." He spoke fluidly, as though reading from a well-rehearsed script, ignoring Rosalind's small shake of the head. She had proof, more than enough proof, but first she had to get through the judge's initial volley of skepticism. Judge Lawson smirked. "Well, Miss Dupree, you've heard the other side. These corporate matters can get complicated. Are you sure you're prepared to handle this on your own?" Rosalind responded calmly. "I am, Your Honor." Lawson tapped his pen on the desk. "Very well. We'll proceed with preliminary motions. Mr. Roland's counsel, I see here you filed a motion to dismiss on the grounds of insufficient evidence." "That's correct, Your Honor," the lawyer said, handing over a crisp document to the clerk. "We believe Miss Dupree has not established a prima facie case." Rosalind felt anger bubble in her gut, though she kept a composed face. She knew these tactics well. They were designed to scare pro se litigants into giving up or making a procedural error. She also knew she had to handle it with poise. "Miss Dupree," the judge said, turning back to her, "if you have anything to say in response, now would be the time." She rose from her seat, not needing to rummage through any papers. Her mind was organized, her arguments clear. "Yes, Your Honor. The complaint details the contract's clauses, which Mr. Roland signed. I have emails, dated transactions, and witness statements that can verify the breach. I respectfully request the court to deny the motion to dismiss because the evidentiary threshold for a prima facie claim is well met." Lawson studied her for a beat, then offered a stifled laugh. "You've got emails and witnesses? A pro se litigant with a well-prepared brief, is that right?" He smirked at Kenneth Roland, as though they shared an inside joke. Rosalind's fists tightened, hidden beneath the wooden counsel table. She had come prepared for hostility, but not quite this level. She'd read about subtle contempt from the bench, but here it was, in full display, condescension. She sensed it was at least partly triggered by who she was, her race, her gender, her decision to appear without counsel. She forced herself to remain calm. "Yes, Your Honor, that's correct," she answered, not letting her voice waver. Judge Lawson finally leaned back, a self-satisfied expression on his face. "We'll schedule a hearing on the motion to dismiss in 2 weeks, provided that Miss Dupree can produce her so-called evidence. Until then, if I might offer a piece of friendly advice, you might want to reconsider hiring a lawyer who specializes in commercial disputes. These matters are more complex than you might realize. Miss Dupree." His words had that paternalistic ring that made Rosalind's skin crawl. She forced a polite nod, deciding not to engage. The judge's tone had effectively set the stage for what she was up against. She noticed the bailiff shifting slightly, obviously used to Lawson's derisive manner, but also perhaps noticing that Rosalind wasn't a typical nervous pro se. She held herself differently, quietly confident. As the short hearing concluded, Judge Lawson moved on to the next case without a second glance. Rosalind slowly packed her belongings, stealing a glance at Kenneth Roland's smug expression. He clearly believed the judge was on his side. She found it almost laughable how quickly people jumped to underestimating her. She walked out into the hallway, ignoring Roland and his attorney's whispered conversation. They breezed by her with an air of superiority, but Rosalind was lost in thought, strategizing how best to proceed. Part of her wanted to reveal her real credentials right then and there, to see their faces twist in shock, but that would come later. She had a hunch that the time would present itself a moment more impactful, more final, for the big reveal. For now, she kept her eyes on the corridor ahead, heart steady, mind prepared. The next hearing might just be the turning point, and she fully intended to use every skill every piece of her background to make sure that justice, real justice, found its way into Judge Lawson's courtroom. 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and strategic planning. Rosalind had learned through a network of contacts, which she seldom liked to reveal, that the judge had a reputation for brushing aside lesser litigants, especially those who came in without pricey legal representation. She also heard whispers that Lawson carried a certain bias against people he deemed outsiders to the established legal community. In her capacity as an agent for the United States Secret Service, though only a handful of people in the courthouse were aware of this fact, Rosalind had been privy to more behind-the-scenes machinations of the justice system than most. The USS was commonly known for protecting presidents and other dignitaries, but it also handled investigations into financial crimes, counterfeiting, and various complex fraud cases. Rosalind herself had worked on numerous high-profile cases involving corrupt officials, money laundering, and identity theft. She had seen firsthand how the very people entrusted with upholding the law could be swayed by power, money, or personal prejudice. In the final days before the motion to dismiss hearing, Rosalind spent her free evenings meticulously organizing her evidence. She had already prepared a binder color-coded tabs for witness statements, email chains, financial statements, and a chain of custody for each relevant document. She also had copies of everything on a thumb drive, just in case she needed to quickly pull up digital proof on a courtroom monitor. On the morning of the hearing, she walked into the courthouse with confidence. She had donned a tailored black suit this time, a faint pinstripe suggesting a quiet but unmistakable authority. She moved gracefully through the metal detectors, nodding politely to the security personnel, most of whom she knew by name, though they only recognized her as a frequent visitor. She was careful never to flash her credentials casually. As the nature of her work demanded, her identity as a Secret Service agent remained need-to-know only. Stepping into courtroom 3 again, she felt a shift in the atmosphere. The audience was larger this time, likely because several cases were on the docket for motions. Judge Lawson was already seated, scanning the crowd with hawk-like eyes. He seemed to linger on Rosalind for a moment, the corners of his mouth turning slightly downward. She took her place at her table, setting her binder and a slim laptop before her. Across the aisle, Kenneth Rowland and his attorney, his nameplate read James Fletcher, sat with the same air of confidence they had before. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, voice reverberating. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Gregory Lawson." The usual formalities ensued, and then Lawson turned his attention to the matter at hand. Case 14 CV09, Dupree versus Rowland. "We're here today to hear arguments on the defendant's motion to dismiss," he said, scanning his notes. "Miss Dupree, are you prepared to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," Rosalind answered firmly. "I see here that you submitted additional documents to support your opposition to the motion to dismiss." "Mr. Fletcher, have you had time to review these?" Fletcher stood, a forced smile on his lips. "Yes, Your Honor. We maintain that these documents are insufficient. They don't establish that my client breached any contract." Rosalind calmly lifted a tabbed section of her binder. "If I may, Your Honor, I'd like to walk the court through the timeline of correspondence. I have documented evidence that Mr. Rowland acknowledged the specific obligations in question." Lawson eyed her binder as though it were a prop in a play he didn't much care for. "Briefly, Miss Dupree, the court's time is limited." She advanced to a podium with a screen set up for exhibits. Tapping a key on her laptop, she pulled up an email exchange. "This is the initial contract email, dated March 4th, she said, zooming in. "In it, Mr. Rowland explicitly states he agrees to Clause 7, which is the heart of the dispute." She navigated to the next email. "Here, dated March 20th, Mr. Roland reaffirms his commitment to the deliverables, including the payment schedule. Fletcher cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Judge Lawson glanced at Fletcher. Is this correct, Mr. Fletcher? Does your client dispute the authenticity of these emails? Your Honor, we do not dispute that these emails exist, Fletcher conceded. But context is everything. My client believed Miss Dupree had already failed to adhere to her part of the arrangement, rendering these later confirmations void. Rosalind flipped to the next tab. This is a notarized statement from a project manager who witnessed my performance under the contract. He can attest I fulfilled all my obligations before Mr. Roland withdrew his resources and refused payment. Additionally, Your Honor, I've submitted evidence of partial payment made by Mr. Roland, which further indicates that he believed my performance was satisfactory up to that point. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Lawson's face, quickly replaced by an impassive stare. I see, he said. Is there anything else? Yes, Rosalind said, her voice steady. I have phone records, bank statements, and a record of a phone call Mr. Roland placed to me on April Honest, in which he specifically cited ongoing partnership plans. He never formally terminated the agreement at any point until he simply disappeared from contact and withheld the remaining balance. The judge stared at the evidence on the screen for a moment, tapping his pen on the desk. Finally, he shifted his attention to Fletcher. I'm beginning to suspect that Miss Dupree's claim has more substance than your motion to dismiss suggests. Mr. Fletcher, what's your response? Fletcher scrambled, flipping through his notes, occasionally glancing at Roland. Your Honor, we maintain that Miss Dupree. Judge Lawson waved him off. We'll decide after a short recess. The gavel struck, and Lawson strode out of the courtroom, leaving the rest behind in a low murmur of confusion. Rosalind caught the irritated expression on Roland's face, tinged with a hint of fear. She calmly stepped away from the podium, returning to her table. A few curious onlookers craned their necks to watch her, sensing that this wasn't the typical pro se meltdown scenario they were used to seeing. After about 10 minutes, the judge returned. Everyone resumed their seats, the tension thick in the air. Lawson cleared his throat. The court has reviewed the evidence Miss Dupree presented and concludes that there is a factual basis for the claim. Accordingly, the motion to dismiss is denied. A rush of relief washed over Rosalind, though she kept her expression neutral. Roland's face tightened. Fletcher let out a quiet groan, all eyes briefly turning toward him. Judge Lawson continued, however, Miss Dupree, be advised that going forward we will adhere to strict procedural rules. Should you fail to follow any of them, the court will not hesitate to dismiss your claim. Understood? Rosalind nodded. Understood, Your Honor. That will be all for today, he said, already calling for the next case on the docket. As she packed up to leave, Rosalind felt a small surge of victory, tempered by the knowledge that the real battle was just beginning. Judge Lawson hadn't changed his tone. He remained condescending, but the evidence had forced him to rule in her favor this time. She wondered how much of his attitude stemmed from personal bias and how much was just his way of keeping control. Outside in the hallway, Fletcher approached her, forced politeness in his tone. Miss Dupree, my client and I would like to, maybe discuss a settlement. She turned, meeting his gaze with calm assurance. I'm open to listening, Mr. Fletcher. Roland stepped forward, his voice cracking slightly. Look, you've made your point. We might be able to come to some arrangement that doesn't waste more of everyone's time. Rosalind studied him. A part of her wanted to end the matter swiftly, to prove her point and move on. But something about the way Roland's eyes darted around, how he refused to really look her in the face, made her cautious. She simply replied, Have your lawyer email me with the details. I'll consider any offer." Then she turned and walked away, leaving them with the ball in their court. As she left the courthouse, she felt a mix of satisfaction and grim determination. She suspected that if a settlement came, it would come with strings attached. And if it didn't come, she would have to see this through to a trial presided over by the same judge who seemed to relish undermining her. One thing was certain: if he pushed her too far, or if her integrity was threatened, she would not hesitate to reveal her credentials. She would not let the scales of justice tip simply because of ignorance or prejudice. Little did she know that the next events would test not only her legal strategy, but also her patience, her sense of dignity, and her oath to uphold the law. And in that crucible, a shocking moment, one that would involve her flashing her USSS badge, loomed on the horizon, ready to shake the foundation of that very courtroom. True to their word, Roland and Fletcher sent a settlement offer the following week. The figure they proposed was laughably small, a mere fraction of what was owed to Rosalind. It also included a confidentiality clause that would bar her from speaking negatively about Roland Enterprises or the events surrounding their contractual dispute. Rosalind studied the proposal in her cramped home office, a second bedroom she'd converted into a workspace. One wall was lined with bookshelves, mostly law references, intelligence manuals kept discreetly locked away, and a few personal mementos from her career. The overhead light cast a warm glow on the typed pages of the offer as she frowned at the bolded dollar amount. This was an insult. Perhaps Roland believed that a single black woman, supposedly lacking resources, would jump at any amount of money. Or maybe he just hoped to avoid further legal entanglements. Either way, Rosalind was determined not to settle on such one-sided terms. She typed a swift email rejecting the offer. She stated, politely yet firmly, that she would not entertain anything less than the full amount owed plus a reasonable sum for damages. The courtesy was perfunctory, her resolve unwavering. Days passed, and she heard nothing in response. No revised offer. No apology. Silence. Then, abruptly, she received a notice that Roland had filed a counterclaim, alleging that she had misrepresented her credentials and abilities, causing him financial harm. The accusations were baseless, but she recognized them as another tactic to wear her down. When she arrived for the next court date, an evidentiary hearing, a hush fell over the gallery upon her entrance. Word had spread that the man who tried to dismiss her claim was now filing a counterclaim. Typically, such a move suggested a scorched earth legal strategy: keep the other side busy, run up their costs, and force them into submission. Judge Lawson sat at the bench, expression unreadable. As she approached, Rosalind noticed an unfamiliar tension in his face. It was as though he anticipated a confrontation. Perhaps he'd realized she wasn't the pushover he had initially pegged her to be. The hearing started with procedural formalities. Then Fletcher laid out the grounds for the counterclaim. Miss Dupree allegedly misrepresented her expertise to secure the initial contract, thereby defrauding Mr. Roland. So, this includes claims of advanced project management skills that did not materialize. Rosalind suppressed a wry smile. Her advanced project management skills included specialized training in fraud detection, operations planning, and interagency coordination skills honed within the Secret Service. She listened quietly until Fletcher finished. When it was her turn, Rosalind spoke measuredly. Your Honor, this counterclaim is a transparent attempt to retaliate. The record shows consistent communication of my capabilities, all well documented. The contract was voluntarily signed by both parties, with no reservations at the time. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over Roland. If Mr. Roland truly believed I misrepresented myself. Why did he willingly pay a partial sum before abandoning his obligations? A spark of irritation crossed Lawson's features. He adjusted his glasses and focused on Fletcher. "That's a good question. Care to respond, Mr. Fletcher?" Fletcher stammered. "Well, Your Honor, at the time of the partial payment, my client was not yet aware of the extent of Miss Dupree's lack of performance. Once he realized the scale of the shortfalls, he chose to cease." "How convenient," Rosalind interjected, unable to keep the sarcasm fully at bay. She added quickly, "Apologies, Your Honor." Lawson eyed her with a hint of disapproval. "I'll allow it. But, Miss Dupree, keep the commentary to a minimum." "Yes, Your Honor," she replied coolly. The rest of the hearing continued in a similar vein. Fletcher presented flimsy evidence, primarily hearsay or incomplete bits of communication. Rosalind countered with meticulously documented records, making it increasingly obvious which side had come prepared. Lawson seemed torn between his usual dismissive stance and the compelling clarity of Rosalind's case. At one point, Lawson leaned in, rubbing his temples as though fighting a headache. "I will need time to review the counterclaim and your response. In the meantime, if there's no settlement, we'll be heading towards a full trial." Roland's face paled at the word trial. Rosalind suspected he had hoped to pressure her into folding long before this stage. She watched him shift in his seat, exchanging anxious whispers with Fletcher. Something told her they might try another last-ditch tactic soon. As Lawson banged the gavel to end the hearing, he tossed Rosalind a final glance, one that carried a mix of curiosity and restrained annoyance. She walked out, once again ignoring the curious stares from onlookers. In the hallway, she felt the wave of adrenaline that always followed a confrontation in a formal setting. It wasn't too dissimilar from the rush she felt during Secret Service operations. The difference was, in her official capacity, she wore the visible authority of her badge. Here, she was effectively undercover, forced to rely on the patience of the legal system. She wondered how long that patience would last. The next time Judge Lawson pulled rank on her or took an overtly disrespectful tone, she might just decide that enough was enough. If her integrity and the dignity of her profession were threatened, she would have no choice but to reveal her badge. After all, lying under oath about her credentials was not an option, and letting an unjust narrative stand without correction violated everything she stood for as a sworn federal agent. Yet she hesitated, aware that brandishing her badge could be seen as intimidation or an abuse of her position. She wanted justice through proper procedure, not through fear. But lines were being crossed each time Lawson allowed condescending remarks or overlooked the blatant dishonesty in Roland's new claims. Little did she know that a confrontation far more dramatic than a routine hearing was on the horizon, one that would test the limits of her discretion and bring the entire courtroom to a standstill. In that moment, the dynamics would change forever, and the judge's mocking laughter would morph into stunned silence. That evening, back in her apartment, Rosalind sat by the window, a mug of chamomile tea in her hands. The city lights of Hamilton County glowed softly in the distance. She sipped slowly, letting her mind wander through a kaleidoscope of memories, pivotal moments that shaped her identity and led her to that courthouse battle. She recalled the rigorous training she'd undergone at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center's FLETC in Glencoe, Georgia, a real place where federal agents from various agencies sharpen their skills. She remembered the punishing drills, the hours of classroom instruction, the high-pressure simulations where each decision felt like a matter of life and death. The instructors had cautioned her that integrity, above all else, was the cornerstone of federal service. She'd listened intently, determined to be a credit to the oath she would eventually take. In her early years, Rosalind had worked quietly behind the scenes, assisting investigations into counterfeit currency schemes. She had rapidly earned a reputation for thoroughness and a knack for understanding the psychology of criminals. Then came a series of promotions, moving her from desk work into more dynamic roles, eventually landing her in a division that partnered with local authorities on financial crimes. She met local judges, collaborated with them on warrants, sat in on depositions always incognito, always the professional in the background. But she noticed that some judges, usually the ones who had no idea of her real position, would treat her with casual disregard. Some even exhibited blatant bias, assuming she was an inexperienced intern or simply the help. She shrugged off most slights. After all, she was there to do a job. But a small part of her always wondered when the day would come that she'd have to stand her ground in a public, dramatic way, proving that she wasn't just some woman to be looked down on, but a federal agent with the power to hold people accountable. The tea cooled in her hands as she thought about Judge Lawson. She recalled the mocking tone in his voice, the slight smirk when he first realized she was pro se. She wondered if he would have acted differently had she been a white male attorney wearing an expensive suit. Probably. But she had chosen to approach the system from the vantage point of an ordinary citizen to ensure that justice was served as it should be, not because of the fear her credentials might invoke. She sighed, setting the mug down. In her mind, the line was clear. She would not break her cover unless the circumstances demanded it, unless justice itself was at stake. With that resolve, she flicked off the lamp and headed to bed, mind already rehearsing the arguments she'd need for the next hearing. The day of the pre-trial conference arrived. The courtroom was unusually crowded, as several high-profile cases were scheduled. Rosalind entered, finding her usual seat. She sensed a particular energy in the air, one that often surrounded Lawson's bench on days where he was poised to make decisive rulings. Roland was already there, chatting nervously with Fletcher. Rosalind caught snippets of their conversation, which seemed tense. She deduced that Roland had run out of ways to avoid paying what he owed, and Fletcher was scrambling to salvage the situation. They were called forward. Judge Lawson peered down at them, rapping his gavel once. "Miss Dupree, Mr. Roland, we're here to finalize any outstanding issues before the trial date. Are both parties ready to proceed?" Rosalind nodded. Fletcher answered in the affirmative, albeit with less enthusiasm. Lawson drummed his fingers on the bench. "Let's start with any final motions. Miss Dupree, you filed a motion to compel discovery documents you allege have been withheld." "Yes, Your Honor," she said, passing a copy to the clerk. "Mr. Roland has not produced bank statements relevant to verifying his claimed financial damages in the counterclaim. I believe these records will disprove his allegations." Fletcher began to speak, but Lawson cut him off, shifting his glare to Rosalind. "Miss Dupree, I see you've also requested more time to gather additional depositions. Are you trying to drag this case out? My docket is already full." Rosalind was taken aback by the sudden shift in his tone. "Not at all, Your Honor. I only recently learned of a witness who can verify Mr. Roland's acknowledgement of the contract terms. I'm simply requesting a short extension to secure that testimony." Lawson exhaled loudly, glaring first at Rosalind and then at Roland. "This is becoming tiresome. A petty contract dispute that's taking up an inordinate amount of this court's time. I'll grant the motion to compel Mr. Roland produce the bank statements within 7 days or face sanctions. As for the extension, Miss Dupree, you have 1 additional week. No more." "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied softly. He slammed his gavel once, signaling the end of that matter. Then, in an unusual move, he addressed the courtroom. "I suggest the two of you figure out a settlement, because I have little patience for drawn-out theatrics. And, Miss Dupree, if you think you can posture your way into a bigger payday, think again. I see right through you." A hush fell over the onlookers. Rosalind felt a wave of anger flash through her. He was blatantly accusing her of trying to milk the system. She locked eyes with him, struggling to keep her composure. "Your Honor, I am only pursuing what I'm lawfully owed." Judge Lawson let out a dry laugh. "Yes, so you claim, but we all know how people try to twist facts for personal gain. I'm warning you, Miss Dupree, don't push your luck in my courtroom." Kenneth Rowland shot Rosalind a smirk, as though validated by the judge's rebuke. Fletcher managed a slight smile, tapping his pen against the table. And in that moment, something snapped inside Rosalind. She had endured the judge's dismissive attitude for weeks, but this direct attack, loaded with implications about her character, was too much. She rose from her seat, heart pounding. All eyes turned to her, a collective intake of breath, registering their shock. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying a steely edge, "I've shown this court every courtesy and followed every procedure. I've presented valid evidence. I respectfully ask for no more than the compensation Mr. Rowland owes me. I will not stand here and be insulted with insinuations that I'm twisting the facts." Judge Lawson's eyes widened, a bit of color rising to his cheeks. "Excuse me, Miss Dupree?" His voice dipped menacingly. She stared at him, calm but unyielding. "I've come here as a citizen seeking justice, but I am also an officer sworn to uphold the law. If there's any question about my integrity or my role in this matter, then let me clarify it once and for all." With that, she reached into her purse. The bailiff tensed, stepping forward slightly. Rosalind moved slowly, carefully, ensuring no one misunderstood her intention. Out came a slim leather case, which she flipped open. The sheen of her official United States Secret Service badge caught the fluorescent light, shimmering like a silent thunderclap in the subdued courtroom. A stunned silence washed over the gallery. The judge's face went slack, as though someone had just unplugged every circuit in his brain. Rowland's eyes bulged, and Fletcher dropped his pen, which clattered loudly against the floor. Rosalind spoke clearly, her words echoing in the hush. "I am Special Agent Rosalind Dupree of the U.S. Secret Service, and I do not twist facts, Your Honor. I uncover them. I uphold them, and I expect the same from this court." Gasps rippled through the spectators. The bailiff looked to Judge Lawson for direction, uncertain how to proceed. Lawson appeared momentarily speechless, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally he croaked, "Bailiff, that's enough. Everyone remain calm." "Miss, do Agent Dupree, why?" he sputtered, grasping for words. She snapped the badge case shut, sliding it back into her purse. "I didn't want to bring my professional identity into this, Your Honor. I wanted to be treated like any other citizen, but your remarks challenged my integrity. I swore an oath to uphold the laws of this nation, and that extends to seeking truth in this courtroom, regardless of who I am or what I look like." Lawson's face was a palette of conflicting emotions, anger, embarrassment, fear. He leaned forward, voice trembling. "Agent Dupree, this is highly irregular. Why didn't you disclose this before?" "Because I wanted this to be about the facts of the case," she answered, voice firm. "But I will not tolerate baseless attacks on my character." Somewhere behind her, a woman whispered to her companion, "I can't believe this is happening." The entire courtroom felt charged, like a storm about to unleash. Judge Lawson cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. Very well. We'll reconvene next week as scheduled. The court appreciates the gravity of your position, Agent Dupree. But please remember, you're still bound by the same procedural rules. She nodded. Absolutely, Your Honor. He banged the gavel with unnecessary force, adjourning the session. It sounded almost like a reflex, a desperate attempt to regain control. Rosalind turned to gather her things, conscious of every pair of eyes locked on her. Roland sank into his chair, ashen-faced. Fletcher scrambled to pick up his fallen pen. The hush lingered, broken only by the rustle of papers and hushed murmurs. As Rosalind walked down the aisle, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Some looked at her with awe, others with sheer curiosity. Outside the courtroom doors, the corridor felt claustrophobic with people pressing in, clamoring for more details. She offered no comment, quickly disappearing into a side stairwell that led to a less crowded exit. The moment she stepped outside, the brisk air slapped her face. She paused, letting her heart rate settle. She had crossed a threshold, no more anonymity, no more quietly enduring the judge's contempt. The stage was now set for a showdown that transcended a mere contract dispute. It had become a test of principles, integrity versus bias, truth versus arrogance. And Judge Lawson? She wondered how he would handle the next step, because from the look on his face, he'd just realized that he had underestimated the wrong person and that karma had arrived, wearing a very official badge. News of the dramatic confrontation spread through the courthouse community like wildfire. By the following day, courthouse staff and local attorneys were abuzz with gossip. People who had only casually observed the earlier proceedings now claimed to have always suspected Rosalind was someone important. Others simply couldn't believe Judge Lawson had allowed his personal biases to drive him into such a humiliating moment. In the coffee shop across the street from the courthouse, legal clerks whispered about the possibility that Lawson would be formally reprimanded. I heard the Judicial Conduct Commission might open an inquiry, one said. He definitely stepped over the line this time. Another chimed in. Within the judge's chambers, the atmosphere was tense. Lawson sat at his ornate desk, brow furrowed as he reread the transcripts of the previous day. His law clerk, a timid young man named Grant, hovered nearby, uncertain how to console the shaken judge. But she never told us she was federal law enforcement, Lawson muttered, flipping pages. Grant cleared his throat. Your Honor, with respect, she had no obligation to. She was the plaintiff in a contract dispute, representing herself. Legally, I know that, Lawson snapped, throwing the papers aside. But did I overstep? He asked, more quietly, his gaze wandering to the wall where his law degree and various certificates were displayed. He recognized in his own voice a rare note of self-doubt. Grant hesitated. You did repeatedly question her integrity, Your Honor. Lawson pursed his lips. He'd always prided himself on his firm hand in court, but something told him he'd gone too far this time. The negative publicity alone could harm his standing, and if the commission got involved, it would be a public spectacle. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Rosalind was equally unsettled. She had taken the day off from her official duties, citing personal obligations, but her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues who'd heard about the incident. Some teased her, "Hey miss, secret agent, you going after judges now?" Others expressed pride, "You did the right thing standing up for yourself." Still, Rosalind felt a pang of unease. She didn't like being the center of attention, and she worried about how her superiors at the Secret Service would react to her public reveal. Would they think she'd misused her position, or would they understand the unique circumstances? She decided to contact her immediate supervisor, Assistant Director Elaine Markham. Elaine had always encouraged her agents to maintain professionalism both on and off the job. and she was known for her empathy. Rosalind hoped that extended to her situation. Elaine picked up on the first ring. "Rosalind, I've been hearing some interesting rumors." Rosalind sighed. "Yes, ma'am. The judge in my civil case made some unacceptable comments, questioning my integrity. I had to set the record straight." There was a pause. "I'll be frank, word travels fast, especially when it involves one of our agents in a public courtroom drama. Some in the higher echelons are concerned about optics. They want a report." "I understand," Rosalind said softly, already anticipating the bureaucratic headache. "I'll file a detailed account first thing tomorrow." "Good. I'll handle what I can on this end," Elaine said. Then her tone softened. "Rosalind, I know this must be difficult, but you've always been an exemplary agent. Don't let this overshadow that. Keep me posted." Relief washed over Rosalind. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your support." After the call ended, she opened her laptop to start drafting the report. She included facts only: the contract dispute, Judge Lawson's repeated insults, her decision to reveal her badge only after he questioned her integrity. She rechecked the language, ensuring it was dispassionate and accurate. If there was an inquiry by the Secret Service or any other agency, she wanted her account to be beyond reproach. The next morning, she sent the document off to Elaine. She also received a single-line email from Fletcher. "We'd like to discuss settlement terms immediately. Please respond with your availability." The abrupt change in tone was telling. Roland, faced with the reality that he was up against not just a nobody but a federal agent, was scrambling to avoid a trial that could tarnish his reputation further. Rosalind's response was simple. She'd only consider a settlement that compensated her fully for the contract breach and covered her legal costs. She politely declined to include any confidentiality clause. If they couldn't accept that, she was ready for trial. 1 week later, the courtroom was once again filled, but this time it was electric with anticipation. Word had gotten around that Agent Rosalind Dupree and Judge Lawson would be face to face again. Even people with cases unrelated to hers made excuses to attend the session, hoping to witness the fallout. Rosalind entered gracefully, ignoring the stares. She took her seat, feeling a surge of confidence. If anyone doubted her integrity now, they would think twice. However, she also reminded herself not to gloat or show any sign of triumph. She was there for justice, not revenge. Roland and Fletcher arrived, looking subdued. Fletcher clutched a stack of papers, presumably related to a settlement proposal. Roland avoided eye contact, keeping his gaze fixed on the floor. When Judge Lawson emerged, his demeanor was visibly changed. He still wore the black robe and that official air, but his face betrayed an uncharacteristic humility. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he spoke. "Good morning, everyone," he began, voice quieter than usual. "Before we proceed with the scheduled matters, I have a brief statement to make regarding the last hearing." A murmur rustled through the gallery. Rosalind sat up straighter, bracing herself. Lawson looked directly at her. "Agent Dupree, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding or offense caused by my remarks. It was never my intention to impugn your character or professionalism. My role is to ensure fairness and justice, and I allowed my personal frustrations to cloud that role." The collective gasp was audible. Judge Lawson rarely, if ever, apologized in open court. Rosalind inclined her head in a respectful nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." "I accept your apology," he exhaled, shoulders visibly relaxing. "Now, regarding the pending matters in Dupree versus Roland, I've been informed that the parties may be close to a settlement." "Is that correct?" Fletcher stood, glancing nervously at his client. "Yes, Your Honor. My client is prepared to fully compensate Agent Dupree for all outstanding amounts under the contract. as well as any costs she's incurred. We would also like the record to reflect that we retract our counterclaim in its entirety." A ripple of approval coursed through the onlookers, many of whom were obviously rooting for Rosalind. She took a moment, letting the gravity of the moment settle in, then replied, "I find those terms acceptable, Your Honor. I request that we finalize them in a written agreement to be entered as an order of dismissal with prejudice, ensuring Mr. Roland cannot reopen these issues." Fletcher nodded eagerly. "We have no objection." Judge Lawson looked relieved, likely thankful to avoid a protracted trial that would keep scrutiny on his courtroom. He rapped the gavel once, albeit more gently. "The court acknowledges the settlement and will await the final order. We will reconvene in 2 weeks to ensure compliance." Court is adjourned for now. As people stood to leave, Rosalind felt the weight of the entire ordeal lifting. She exchanged a polite handshake with Fletcher, who mumbled an apology on Roland's behalf. Roland himself said nothing, only nodded once before hurrying out like a man who couldn't escape fast enough. Rosalind glanced toward Judge Lawson. He was speaking quietly with his clerk, but when he noticed her gaze, he gave a tight, reserved smile. She returned the gesture, understanding that, while he may not transform overnight, this was a step in the right direction. Perhaps the next time he'd think twice before ridiculing someone in his courtroom, especially when he knew nothing of their true capabilities or status. As she stepped out of courtroom 3 for the last time, she couldn't help but marvel at how quickly the tide had turned. She had faced disrespect, racism, and arrogance, but emerged with her integrity not just intact, but validated. Her faith in the principle that truth prevails, albeit sometimes with dramatic flair, was reaffirmed. Still, the final chapter wasn't quite closed. She had her settlement, but there was one more thing left, the reckoning Judge Lawson would face, if any. Because karma, she believed, never forgets a debt. Weeks passed. Rosalind finalized the settlement terms, receiving the full amount due to her, plus damages, in a lump sum payment. She felt a sense of closure as she placed the check in her bank, a tangible symbol that she was no one's victim. Yet echoes of the courtroom incident continued to ripple through the local legal community. Complaints about Judge Lawson's behavior over the years, once whispered in corners, now gained fresh momentum. Cases where litigants, particularly women and people of color, had felt unjustly belittled were suddenly in the spotlight. Local journalists picked up the story, running headlines like, "Judge under fire for possible misconduct and has bias found a home in Hamilton County Courthouse." A formal inquiry by the Judicial Conduct Commission ensued. Subpoenas were issued, calling in lawyers, plaintiffs, and even court staff who had witnessed questionable behavior. While Rosalind herself was not required to testify, her case had settled. She did submit a written statement, confirming the events she had personally experienced. The commission convened private hearings, and although these were not open to the public, rumors circulated widely. Some said Lawson defended himself vigorously, insisting he was misunderstood, while others claimed he showed genuine remorse. Whatever transpired behind those closed doors, the final decision emerged with a public reprimand. The commission issued a written censure, criticizing Lawson for creating a hostile environment and for conduct that undermined the integrity of the bench. The censure was a significant blow to Lawson's reputation, an indelible mark on his career. There was talk that he might retire early, citing health reasons, to avoid the shame of further public scrutiny. Rosalind followed these developments from the periphery, busying herself with her real work, tackling a new case involving an elaborate counterfeit check ring. She'd walk into her office, her colleagues giving her a respectful nod, some occasionally joking, "Any judges to take down this week?" She'd laugh politely and move on, preferring not to revel in Lawson's downfall. One evening, After a grueling day of interviews and paperwork, she returned home to find a handwritten letter in her mailbox. The return address was from the county courthouse. Curious, she opened it. "Dear Agent Dupree, I wish to extend a personal note of apology and reflection. After much consideration, I've decided to step down from my position. My actions, especially towards you, brought to light my own blind spots and biases. I realize now that I failed to uphold the principles I was sworn to protect. I am truly sorry for any harm or insult I caused you. Though it may mean little now, I hope you can accept these words in the spirit they are intended. Respectfully, Gregory Lawson." She stared at the page, mixed emotions stirring within her. Part of her felt relief, another part sympathy. In the end, she decided not to respond. His remorse, though late, was his own burden to carry. She placed the letter in a drawer, a keepsake of a painful but transformative chapter in her life. Karma had indeed come for Judge Lawson. Not in a dramatic, vengeful wave of destruction, but in a slow, inevitable shift, a reckoning of his own conscience, the legal community's scrutiny, and the moral code he had vowed to uphold. As for Rosalind, she went on to excel in her Secret Service career, forever carrying the memory of that day in Courtroom 3. It served as a reminder that the fight for genuine justice sometimes requires stepping out from the shadows, letting the world see exactly who you are and who you refuse to be. Thank you for joining me on this roller coaster journey filled with injustice, courage, and that fateful moment when the balance of power shifted in the most unexpected way. We watched as Rosalind Dupree, a dedicated Secret Service agent, walked into court as an ordinary citizen, only to be demeaned by a judge who had no idea the force of integrity and truth she wielded. In the end, karma came full circle, reaffirming that no badge or robe stands above what's right. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to bring more tales of drama, triumph, and justice to the screen. Share this video with friends and family who need a reminder that sometimes victory comes from the most unexpected places, and that one voice can indeed make a difference in the pursuit of what's fair.